Hi guys, my name is Devan Vijay Singha.
Hi, I'm Samiha Rahman, and we are here to speak on the topic of creating reusable components for React Native.
This will be the lineup for today. We to make this beginner friendly, we are going to first give an introduction to what React Native is, and we will be talking about what components in React Native is and the types of components, and we will be diving into how you can make these components reusable and the benefits of using reusable components. So to wrap things up, we'll do a quick demo and demonstrate to you guys what we explained in the slides. And also, finally, we have an exciting new React Native framework, UI framework for React Native called Firstborn. Okay, so to start off, what exactly is React Native? React Native is a JavaScript framework for creating native mobile applications for both Android and iOS. So here I have highlighted the word native. So that I did intentionally because this, unlike other hybrid mobile application frameworks, React Native actually does not run on a web view. It actually renders real native UI components. So that you could, because of that, you can expect really good performance. So one may ask why you need to use React Native when you can simply use Android to or Java to build Android and Swift to build iOS. But using if you use the React Native framework, using one single code base, you can actually build your mobile application for both Android and iOS at the same time. This will really decrease the time spent on development, and also it will decreases cost because of that. And also it will be really easy for web developers to transition from web development to mobile development, since React Native, as I said before, it's a JavaScript framework, and I'm pretty sure all web developers should definitely know JavaScript. And also there's something called JSX, and which we will talk about in the future slide. And due to this reason, it makes it really easy for web developers to transition into building React Native mobile applications. As I said before, it renders native components, UI components. So it does not run on a web view. So as I said before, it has really good performance when it comes to building cross-platform applications. And there is also misconception that when you use hybrid applications, it's really difficult to integrate things like native modules like the camera and etc. But it's not the case for React Native. As you can see, there is a good community and good documentation and a lot of third-party libraries which can be integrated easily with React Native when you develop applications.
So he spoke a little bit about JSX, and what JSX is actually an extension of JavaScript that allows React to use XML-like code to call and render components. So XML-like code looks a bit like the HTML tags, paragraph, and div that we end up using for websites. So it's very easy for a transition for web developers to move into React Native as a beginning for their mobile development journey. So what exactly is a component? In truth, anything that can be displayed inside an application is called a component. React Native itself comes with some inbuilt components, and one of the very basic ones is the text component. And we can use all these smaller React Native declared components to make our own ones. So with that, we can deduce that components can include other components inside it, kind of like componentception. So what we have here is a small page that contains mainly just a list. That list itself is a component. Each list item is another component that we had made ourselves, and those small components called the contact component contains text and image components, which are actually React Native's own components.
Yes, so Samia explained what a component actually is. So this is actually, if you take the code of a very simple component, this is what it will look like. And you guys might be wondering what this is. So this is what we explained before. This is actually JSX. So using this, it will make it really simple for the developers to create applications with React Native. And if you take a look at what this same thing would look like in the code, if JSX is not there, it will look like this. So to create such a simple thing, you need so much of code. Just imagine you have to create a complex application, and it will be really messy and it will really be hard to maintain. So thank God for JSX.
So what are component properties, or props as it says in React Native? So props are these properties that you can pass into any component that will customize it to display what you wish to display. So as we spoke of previously, there was this contact component that we saw in a list in one of the previous slides. And there you can pretty much send any sort of data to get two different contacts. So for example, the first one has me and the second has Devon. We just had to change a few simple things like the image and the name. And if we had different roles, even the roles we could change it to give us two very different components. So that's how we use properties. Properties will customize the component that you send data into. So for web developers or anyone else who has seen a bit of HTML and how it works, a prop can be considered like an attribute in most HTML tags. So for example, in this case, the anchor tags href could be, which is the attribute, is like this contact component's image prop, and the data or the value is whatever is passed within it. So inside the contact component, to access all this data, we need to use the keywords this.props in this case, because all the properties is passed as an object to the contact component. So if you were to, for example, need to only call the name property, you will have to use the identifier this.props.name. So you have to use the same name as the property that you use in the previous slide. So in case instead of name you had put something like first name, you would have to update it to say this.props.firstname.
Alright, so since now you know what component props are, let's take a look at what component state is. Component state is more like the data which is within the component. So for example, you can see this code block over here. This actually represents a class-based component, which we will discuss in the types of the components in the future slides. So this class-based component will have this property called this.state. So this state is actually some data which can be used and manipulated within the component itself. So in this example, you can see this screenshot which contains a list of contacts, and here in the state you can see we have defined an array of objects which has properties like name and role, and we have passed it to a flat list as the data and displayed in the screen. So this is so when it comes to state, this is used when like you may ask why use state when you have props and you can pass this contact list to the component. But this is mostly used when the state the data changes within the component. For example, if you want to get this contact list from an API call, you can basically send an API call within the component, and you can actually update the state inside the component. So that is a basic example. If we compare these two head to head, so as you can see in the diagram on the right, props are actually passed from a parent into a component, but state is actually contained within the component. And as I said before, props are not mutable, they are read only, but state is it can be manipulated. And in the case of props, you can have default values and it can be validated. So when it comes to components, there is actually two main types of components. So this is important because the behavior of these two are a bit different. So it's really good to know what the difference is when you like attempt to build reusable components. So let's first look at what these functional components are. So basically a functional component is basically a simple method which will return some JSX. So you know what JSX is, right? So that is just return and it will display a component. And if you talk about functional components, it does not automatically have state, but from the new version of React, a 16.8.0, React hooks was introduced, which gives functional components like class-like abilities, like state and lifecycle methods. So that's something to look forward to. So this is basically a small example of a functional component. You can see the props is actually passed into like you can receive the props as the first argument of the function, and the properties can be accessed via that. And you can see basically it is a function which returns a block of JSX. And if you ask why we need to use this function component, so obviously there is going to be less code. You will see why I say this when you get to know class-based components in the next set of slides. So it has actually less number of code, and it will be easier to read and maintain and also understand. And it actually has better performance. And components, these components are actually used when there is like little to no state manipulation. And if there is like a heavy like a state manipulating component, it's better to go for a class-based component.
So now that we've looked into what functional components are, let's have a little dive into class components. Now, by default, all class components have access to both props and states easily, and they can also contain multiple methods within it to manipulate the state many times over. And since this is a subclass of the component class which is declared by React, it can include certain lifecycle methods. For example, when the component is created and it mounts on for us to view. So here is a very simple example of class components, and this is something that we've actually included in the demo. Here, what we do is a simple list item that can be expanded. So we use the state expanded to hold on to the actual state of the component, whether you display the description or not. So in that case, when we start off with the expanded value of false because we only wish to see the heading. But upon clicking on that heading section, you expand it, you switch the state to expanded to display the description. And again, after this is clicked, if you were to click on the heading again, you would collapse it, thus again manipulating your state of expanded to false. So why you should use class components, like Devon said previously, best to use functional components when you can use states in functional components, but it's better to use if there is a really huge amount of state or a huge amount of state manipulation that's going to happen. It's better to move on to a class component because you can extend it and have multiple functions within it to change it according to your wish. That's why all pages, or most pages actually, in React Native applications are actually class components, since they require the use of all those methods and that easy access to state for all its state manipulation. So now that we have seen what props and what states are and exactly the difference between functional and class components, we can bring all of this together to make any and all components that we write reusable. So this is actually a few 5-step thing you have to go through to make your own reusable components. Now, if you were to take an app, it's really, really huge. So the first thing you need to do is find out sections in your application that are very generic. For example, if your app has like 4 to 5 lists, and they pretty much display the same thing, could be an image, a description, and a heading, then it would be best to use even our contact component. It can be changed into any list item. Afterwards, you need to look deeper into it and find out exactly what properties you will need to pass to get your desired view. Afterwards, it would be best to pick which type of component you would pick. For example, if you are looking for little to no state manipulation, go ahead with the functional component because it means that there will be better performance and it won't be laggy as in comparison to class components unless you require lots of internal state or functions. So as Devon had mentioned previously, you can validate props, and that's an important part that we need to consider because we need to make sure that any properties we pass actually don't break any of the code within the component. So we need to validate them. And finally, we have to make sure that these components are flexible, because if everything relies on just one component being missing, then your component might not have a use being reusable since it would easily break. All these 5 points will be something that we will speak of in the demo as well. So why should you make these components reusable? First things first, applications, if you take a normal application, it's really huge. So you have to make sure that you keep styling consistent throughout. And that's one way that one benefit you have of using reusable components. And since these components are reusable, you don't need to keep coding the internal code every single place. You just call it once, and this decreases your lines of coding. And finally, like I said, if you were to take the contact component, you can customize it to display pretty much anything you want depending on whatever props that you pass to it.
Okay guys, so I think you have like an overall idea now of what the component is and overall to create a reusable component. So let's dive in and look at a small demo which you will understand more on how you could achieve this. So you could actually so I think this repo link should be available for you guys in the description or in the chat. So this is actually the repo we are going to use for the demo. So if we dive right in, so this is the first reusable component that we will be creating. So if you look at the code of this button, so you can see it's clickable, and so if you look at the code of this, it's basically a function. As I said before, this is a function which returns some JSX, so it's a functional component. And you can see here we have passed in some props and we get these props over here. So if you guys are familiar with ES6 syntax, you know what this is. You deconstruct this props object and you get the properties. And so basically what we do here is, so you guys will understand this more if I just show you how this component is used. So this is like, if you are familiar with React Native, you know this project structure, and this is like a very basic application which only has this page, and in here I have imported the button which is created in the SRC, and so I have created this button, and like this you can actually have another button over here. And so if I save this, so it will reload, and you can see there is two identical buttons. And so if you want to actually say, this says click me, but if you want to say something else, so it's like press me. And if you want to change the color, you simply have to change the properties. So you can see basically it has exactly the like same other styling and other attributes are same, but the color and the like the text is different. So this is like very easily achievable using component props. So if you take a look at this again inside the component, you can see how this actually works. So you guys might be wondering how I actually pass the color over here and this actually turned to another color. So basically in here we can actually pass another property to this component, and this is actually a built-in component for React Native. So this is imported from React Native itself, and here we can use the cascading effect, like so we have actually defined the style over here as an object, and we have given some properties, but here we can use this syntax to actually create the background, like to change the background color using a prop. So that's what happens exactly. So the color you pass here will actually come here through these props, and you get it through this construction, and we will apply it here. So that is like the basic flow and the usage of props. And you guys can see over here we have prop types. So prop types is actually external library which you have to install when you're using React Native, and this will actually help you really validate your props which is passed to your component. So if you don't pass a title prop, it will actually give you a warning. So when you are developing, you can make sure to fix all the warnings and make sure the correct props are passed into your components. And also there is this built-in default props, and here you can give default color. So basically if I do not pass, so this color is tomato, if I remove this, so I'm not passing a color, and so you can see it will change to default color which is mentioned here. So having these things will help you, as I said before, to improve consistency, and like also in terms of styling it will make it consistent. Also, let's then look at another component. So this is actually the contact component, which we showed you guys in the slide. So let me just add this to the app.js. Okay, so basically here again we are importing the contact, and again we are passing props as same as before. We are passing the name, the role, and also an image. And I have created two instances of this component. So it's like this contact is for me, and this is for Samiha, and this is for me. And if I refresh this, you can see this will appear. So I actually don't need this right now, so I'm going to remove this. Alright, so you can see these two contacts appearing. So as you can see, it's if you look at this component, it's also an function component. So it doesn't require any state within the component, because there is like these attributes are not likely to change within the component. So that's why we have used props over here, and same as before, we deconstruct it, get it, and so we mentioned, so something special in this component which we don't find in button is that we mentioned, like when you're creating reusable components, you should make the components flexible. So using tricks like this and conditions like this, you can actually make your components very flexible. So what I mean by that is, for example, you may need a list with only the text, but you don't need the image. So you can basically use the same contact, but you just don't pass the image. So if I just simply remove this, so you can see you don't have an image, but you get like the styling and everything looks fine. You can use a list of just text. So that is one nice trick you can use. So it's same for other like role and other stuff as well. So you can use these kind of tricks when you're creating your components as well. And here similarly it's almost same as the previous one. We have used prop guides to validate the component props, and you can just go through the props type documentation, and it will show like the various available APIs and like the values you can access. And yeah, so now I think we can take a look at a class based component.
So what we have here is the same thing that we explained before previously in the slides, the expandable list item. And to just show a simple so over here, what we do is just send one title and another description, and you end up getting this as your output. So here, upon clicking it, you would actually run this method called hide show, handle hide and show. That is there. So this will actually switch your state of expanded between true and false, thus expanding and collapsing the description. So as you can see here, a bit more on style cascading. Ideally, if you have components that require something extra, in this case, I have allowed the user to also enter a body and a header color, but I keep most of the other styles similar throughout. So I would define them down below the slides, the style, and afterwards would extract the colors from the properties as previous by using the ES6 deconstruction, and then include it over here, pass it as parameters so that we can get a finalized style for your component. So by default, again we're using here a few default properties. By default it's blue, but if I wish to change it to probably say green, put a header color of green, it would display the exact same component but with a header color of green. Put like green. And there you have it, a very simple way of changing and customizing your class components as well.
Okay guys, so that was our simple demo. As a conclusion, now you guys know like it's like creating a reusable component is really easy, and once you get the hang of what props are, what state is, and the differences between the types of components and validating props, passing props, and those concepts, it will be really simple for you guys to implement reusable components in React Native. And so to have a consistent styling, it is actually really important that you use reusable components. So hope you guys learn something out of this, and hopefully you will in the future implement your own reusable components.
So now on to something a bit exciting from our side. Here at 99X, we've actually come up with our own React Native UI framework that creates a whole bunch of reusable components using all the principles and concepts we have just spoken about. It's called Firstborn. So we have actually had about 500 odd downloads and about 180 stars strong. So now that you've learned how to make reusable components, go ahead and start contributing to Firstborn and be a part of us.
Okay, thank you guys. So if you have any questions regarding our webinar today, so it's time for you guys to fire away your questions.
One dude had a question. The
Okay, so since seems to be no questions, we'll wrap up the session and hope you guys learned something valuable from this webinar. And thank you very much for joining in.
Please do subscribe for more content that is just as great as this. Thank you very much and see you soon.
Guys.